Welcome to Imperfect Momming. Our children are constantly looking to us for examples. The term role model doesn't quite cut it here. We are shaping their worldview with every move we make. You see, it's not in the lectures we give or moments where we are actively attempting to teach them. It's in the micro movements we make, the unconscious ways in which we navigate life. We are constantly teaching our children how to show up for themselves, their friends, their future partners, and even their future children. So what can we do to ensure we are raising thoughtful, compassionate, self-aware human beings? We have to become them ourselves. No one is perfect, but we can still all be better, and it starts with self-healing. Let's get to it. Welcome back to Imperfect Momming, and we have a very special guest today, Dr. Kelly Frindell. Welcome to Imperfect Momming.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. So tell us just a little bit about who you are and what you do.
So I am a test prep expert. I help students get ready for standardized tests, and I have primarily two different groups of students that I work with. I work with high school students who are taking the SAT and the ACT for entrance into US universities and colleges. And then I also work with younger students who are looking to go to private schools and boarding schools within the US as well.
Very cool. So I don't have a student that's doing any of those. But what are the concerns that some parents come to you with? Like, is there a most popular concern that happens?
Mhm. So right now, especially with the college test, there's a lot of uncertainty about what's going on right now in the college admissions landscape because when COVID started, pretty much overnight, all of the SAT and ACT tests got canceled because nothing was being held in person and you couldn't take a test for 6 or 7 months. And so at the time, most colleges and universities switched to what's called test optional, where you can choose whether you want to submit a score or not.
Mm.
Some of those changes were just for that first year. Some schools said, we're going to try a 3-year experiment with this. And some of them just said, we're going test optional forever. And right now, we're getting towards the end of that 3-year period where some of them said, we're going to experiment with it. And there's a lot of confusion about whether students need to take tests or not. So I have a lot of students come to me or their parents and they say, oh, well, everything's test optional. We just don't have to do it. And there's quite a bit more nuance to it than that. And for a lot of students, they still really need to be taking tests. Some students don't necessarily, but a pretty good chunk of kids do need to do it. And so there is a lot of confusion about that, and then about how to prepare, how to choose a test, when to prepare. And those tend to be the big concerns that I see.
Mhm. So you help with the student with the preparation for the tests, maybe
Mhm.
like memory kind of stuff, or
Right. So there's really two parts to test prep. One part is just straight up test strategies because each test does have its own specific strategies and skills that you need for them. But there's also just the basic skill work as well. And so when students come to me, we work on both of those things. We work on the specific strategies, but we're also making sure that they know all their math skills, that they know their math formulas, that they know how to use commas and verbs and nouns and things like that, which a lot of my students, especially in these last few years, because everybody missed so much school, there are significant gaps that I'm seeing in my students who are coming to me because they missed so much school. And that it's not a blame thing or anybody's fault. It's just a reality of the situation is everybody missed a lot of things. And so some of it is catching up with things that slipped through the cracks along the way.
yeah, it's interesting how I heard a lot of stories in both directions with, some kids that were thriving at home
Mhm.
during the pandemic because they didn't have the distractions from their classmates, and then other kids that were really struggling because they couldn't just sit in front of a computer all day and do the independent study that my son experienced. My son's 10.
Mhm.
And there was a lot of like, okay, here's the lesson, now go work.
Right.
And that some people don't do very
with that.
Right. And the online learning can work very well. And that's what I do. I work with all my students virtually now. I was all in person before the pandemic and have switched to doing virtually. And I do have parents come to me with those concerns. They say, "Oh, my kid had this terrible experience with Zoom school. We can't do online. It won't work." And the thing is, it does work, but you have to have the right tools. You have to have the right training. And all of the teachers got thrown into a situation they weren't expecting. And overnight, they were just expected to be a Zoom teacher. And that is an impossible task. And for most people, it didn't go well. And again, not anybody's fault. I don't want to place blame on anybody because everybody was put in an impossible situation. But when done correctly, online learning actually works very well when you have the tools, when you have the training, and also when you're not doing it. I honestly myself couldn't have done Zoom school. When I think about sitting for 7.5 hours with 30 people in a meeting all day long, I couldn't have done it either. But
Mhm.
with online tutoring, it's a totally different thing. I do all one-on-one. An hour with someone one-on-one is a whole different story than sitting for 7 hours and trying to absorb something off a
Yeah.
screen passively. It's a whole different experience.
Yeah, I totally get that. I used to love, actually, I got at least one new desk, if not two, um, during the pandemic. I was, because actually I had a desk that I loved, and then the pandemic happened, and I was working from home with two monitors, and that desk did not support
Mhm.
two monitors. And so I got a different desk, and I love my desk, but after having, certain days of working 8 hours, sitting, staring, sitting on the chair, like I have two different chairs. I have my
Mhm.
podcast chair, and then I have my comfy chair.
Uh-huh.
And the reality is that I try my hardest to only be sitting at the desk if I'm recording something or having a
Mhm.
professional call. And the rest of the time I'm sitting in my comfy space, partly because I'm pregnant and partly just because it feels like freedom to go and sit on the couch.
Right. And a lot of people just didn't have the right tools or the right setup to be successful during those years. And you need the right tool for the right job. And um, being thrown into Zoom school with no warning was neither of those things.
Right.
But with
I
with the right support, it can work very well.
and I really did feel, I always was very appreciative of teachers. Everyone in my family is a teacher,
Mhm.
and I see how hard they work, you know,
Yeah,
during
absolutely.
school and afterwards. And my my mom and my stepmom had both retired by the time the pandemic happened and Zoom school started. And I asked them both, I was like, "So how would you have felt being thrust into Zoom school?" And they're like, "Oh, I would have retired."
Yes. And I resisted going online for a long time because I was in person for probably 17 years pre-pandemic and I didn't want to do it. I just said, no, this sounds horrible. And I was scared of it. And right before the pandemic, I actually decided to take my business online because I wanted to travel. And I figured it'd take me 3 to 5 years to get out of my office, get online, get parents and the kids to be able to accept it. And it took 3 months in a pandemic. And I was online. And then once I figured out how to make it work, I was like, oh, I shouldn't have been afraid of this. This isn't scary. And in fact, there were a lot of really good things about it, especially because kids are so busy. It is just so easy to log on. You're at home, you're having your snack, and now you're doing math tutoring or SAT tutoring. And then you log off and you're on to the next thing, and nobody's sitting in traffic. And it,
Mhm.
it saves a lot of time and hassle.
Yeah. And I really love paper calendars,
Hmm.
but the pandemic has ruined that for me because of, Zoom meetings and everything.
Time
Like
zones.
the in time zones, and like I need the reminder. Like I'll have a 1 minute reminder
Hmm.
for whatever meeting I'm about to attend, because it takes 1 minute to go from wherever I'm in the house to in front of the computer. Um, and it makes it impossible to have a paper calendar.
same
Oh,
thing.
it makes me so sad because I love them so much.
I
And they're
loved my
just
paper
tough.
calendar too, and I know a lot of the students don't use them, and I always tried to get them to use them pre-internet and pre-COVID days, and they just wouldn't. And there are a lot of I do like finding online tools that are useful that can replicate it, and that online calendar, and I mean, excuse me, the paper calendar, and there are some good digital tools out there for sure.
Yeah, I can't quite get used to the digital calendar that you can write on with your tablet. Like I've tried 2 or 3 different ones and it's like it's either Google Calendar or it's nothing. Like I just can't do it. I try really hard. So that's pretty cool that you were already in the mindset of I'm going to go online, and you had the plan of 3 to 5
I
years,
had the
and then
plan,
here's
and it
your
went a lot faster.
present of COVID.
Mhm. Present, yeah. And it did speed things up. And when I had planned to go online, I do work with younger students. I work with fifth and eighth graders who are taking the entrance exams for private schools. And it had not been my intention at that time to take the younger kids online because I just didn't think it would work. And then now it turns out my fourth graders and my fifth graders know how to annotate, they know how to screenshot, they can send me things, they know how to write on the screen, and they're all pretty well versed in Zoom and better than a lot of my adult students, in fact. And that has actually worked out fine as well.
Yeah. It's fun for me with my son because he's 10, so he's in 5th grade, and he's I think he got maybe a little bit behind doing some of the online stuff, just because it was that whole I can't sit for 7 hours and
Mhm.
pay attention, and really absorb all the information. So he got, by the end of the school year, he was really bored and not focusing as much. But being in person again, with a teacher that he really loves,
Mhm.
he's now back caught up and teaching other kids. So I guess the math facts that they have to know,
Mhm.
once you've mastered them, they let you stop taking the test. And so he mastered his, and he's now teaching other kids, and helping them with their math facts, which I think is kind
That's
of cool.
nice. Yeah, and that's something that I'm seeing a lot of. There's been a lot of slippage with math facts, and I had already been seeing that prior to the pandemic. I've been teaching
Mhm.
test prep for about 22 years, and probably within about the last 5 to 7 years, I have seen a significant decline in my students knowing their math facts. So my fifth graders don't know their times tables, they don't know their division facts, they're not able to add and subtract quickly in their head. And so I had already started putting some of that back into my curriculum, my test prep curriculum, but
Mhm.
especially now, my younger students and my older students now too, they really don't have those facts down. And it is very difficult to do math. It's difficult to take tests. It's difficult to function in life if you don't have those basic facts. And
Yeah.
it's sometimes the kids or the parents will say to me, oh, but they'll always have a calculator, or they have their phone, or they have this. And a lot of times you do, but especially this test for the younger kids, you can't use a calculator on them.
Mm,
And on the SAT, there is a no calculator section where
mm,
there's one section you can use calculator, one you can't. And it's difficult to do anything. You can't do percents, you can't do decimals or fractions or long division if you don't know your multiplication tables.
yeah. Do you think that that's because of the new math that the way that they're teaching it?
I think so. I know until the pandemic, I was based locally in Texas, and I know some of the schools near me had started teaching some new math curriculum, and they had stopped emphasizing multiplication and they had stopped emphasizing long division, and they weren't teaching it, in fact. And so I was having a lot of students come to me not knowing those facts,
Mm,
and they at some of those schools they were teaching in particular these new methods of math, which truthfully drive me a little crazy. And I typically teach that. I say, here's how you do multiplication, and this is how you will do it anywhere else that you go to school. And when they learn the methods, which are the methods probably all of us learned, they go, oh, this is really easy. I say, I know. That's why everybody learned it this way. So some
yeah.
of it has to do with that. And some schools just have de-emphasized that rote learning with the idea that you don't need it. And I understand the argument about that, but you need it. You need it to be able to function and do math, and especially for life and for tests too.
Yeah. That's interesting because I know that, they as a trend, they're kind of diverging away from like art and music and like getting away from the arts, but I never thought that I would hear anybody say that math is
Yes.
not important.
And it's not that it's not important, it's just there's been a de-emphasis of the rote learning of it and the rote facts that you know 6 times 8, that you know what 56 divided by 7 is. And I have just seen it really hurts kids not to know those facts. It makes things a lot more difficult.
And I think I remember, you know, I learned them at some point, and then I think I forgot, you know, some of the like 7s and 8s.
Yes, and that's really
multiplications of 7s and 8s. Maybe even the 6. 9 I had, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 were all really good. 12 was hard for me. But now having a 10-year-old, I got him much better. And I even kind of learned some of the new math, and I understood, like, you know, some of it. I do remember the moment that he caught on to fractions. And it was like, until he caught it, it was really frustrating for him because he wanted the whole pie. Like, you know, if you have 1/4, and I don't know why he was thinking that it was 2/3 left or something. There was some weird hiccup in his brain. And then he got it, and it just was like boosted his confidence a lot, which I found interesting because I'm interested in stuff like that.
Yes. And that's what I find a lot of test prep is, just boosting people's confidence, because I have a lot of students come to me who say, oh, I'm bad at math. I can't do math. I just can't. And they have struggled historically in math. And sometimes, a lot of times, it's not that they're bad at math. It's that they missed some basic skills along the way and then were never really able to pick back up from there. And if you do miss the basics, it makes all of the rest of math hard. And I know this from personal experience because I was really good at math when I was young, and we moved when I was in 6th grade, and it was the beginning of middle school, and I got there too late for them to put me in the advanced math class. So what they did is they put me out in the hallway with an 8th grade textbook, which was Algebra 1, and I hadn't taken pre-algebra yet. I was just starting 6th grade, and they said, here, teach this to yourself. And I spent an entire year sitting in the hallway teaching myself Algebra 1 incorrectly. And I didn't learn it correctly because I was 11 or 12 and didn't know what I was doing. And it messed me up for the rest of math for all of middle school and all of high school. And I really thought I was bad at math. And when I started teaching test prep in my early 20s, I had to relearn all of the math curriculum, and I was taught some different ways to do it. And once I had that basic foundation, I realized, oh, I'm not bad at math. I just was missing some things. And once I could look at it kind of from top down, instead of being in the middle of it, I could see, oh, this relates to this and this and this, and this is why. And now I actually really love teaching math because I understand why students have a hard time with it. And what I found is that people who are really, really smart at math often have a hard time teaching it because they just don't understand. Everything is so logical and so intuitive to them. And when they sit with a kid who doesn't understand something, like, well, why can't you just see that it's this? And I know why they can't see that, because I had that same problem when I was a kid. And so a lot of it is just really filling in the gaps and building up people's confidence with it, because there are people who do have, learning differences with math, and that's definitely true. But most of everybody else, it's just they're missing some skills.
Yeah. And it's absolutely true. I think that, I took to math like a duck in water. I'm one of those rare people that at least what I had heard is you're either a math person or an English person, and I really enjoyed both. I'm a good writer. I'm not great at the grammatical rules. But I love writing, but I really took to math a lot as well. So when I'm trying to teach my son something that I learned 30 years earlier, it came easy. I really struggled with the piece that you're talking about. So that's 100%. I get that.
And there is a myth that you're either good at math or you're good at English and verbal, and that honestly is not true too. It's true for a lot of people, but for me, like my verbal skills are very high. I'm very good at vocabulary. I'm a very good writer. And with the math, since I've gone back and relearned it, I'm very good at math too. But I am terrible at art. If you want me to draw you a picture, it will look like a 5-year-old because I just don't have those skills, and I probably will never have those skills. And so the people really do have all kinds of varying abilities. And so half of what I do too is just busting up people's myths about I'm good at this, I'm bad at this. If this means this about me, or if I'm bad at math, it means that I'm not a good person or I don't have a good future. And none of that is true.
Yeah. I'd love to go through and destroy those kinds of myths and
Mhm.
like a myth buster, but for the thought process. That's a good idea. Yeah, because I would, while you're talking, I'm like thinking, man, I'm really bad at taking tests. And I don't think that I'm bad at taking tests. I just get extremely bored while taking a
Mhm.
test because I'm also an auditory learner. So sitting there and reading each question gets boring. And so then I'm like, okay, I'm over this. And I just start filling stuff in.
Yes. And that's something I also talk with my students a lot about is what these tests mean, because they get very caught up in thinking SAT or ACT is an IQ test, or it says how smart they are, or if they're going to succeed in life. And they aren't IQ tests, and they aren't even aptitude tests. The SAT used to be called the Scholastic Aptitude Test, and they had to stop calling it that because it isn't. And
Mhm.
so now SAT officially stands for nothing. It was just SAT. And so all it really measures is how somebody did on a particular test on a particular day. And that's it. That is all it says about a student. It's a particular set of skills that somebody decided was important, but it isn't necessarily, those skills are not necessarily more important or less important than other skills. And that's something that took me a long time to understand, is that inherently it doesn't make you a more valuable person because you're good at math versus being good at art or being good at music or being good at business or sports. They're all skill. Everybody has a talent of something. And just because somebody has said, oh, this one skill is important, it doesn't mean you're a better or worse person if you're good or bad at those things.
Yeah, and I love that that I've started hearing teachers saying or one of my son's teachers said that the test is not to prove what you know, it's to show me where I need to teach more.
Mhm.
And I was
And
like,
yes, and
that's
for classroom tests, there is definitely an element of that. And
mhm,
I've taught classes at the college level, and I do find the same thing for those ones. Is in part a lot of it was feedback for me is, am I doing a good job of teaching?
mhm,
And with the standardized tests, it's a little bit different because they're used for different purposes. But there is some element of that too, of just what do you know and what don't you know? And something I've found in these last few years with COVID is sometimes people are reluctant to do test prep, or they're very disparaging about it because they're like, oh, it's just teaching to the test and that doesn't have anything to do with real life. And there are definitely strategies for different tests that are test specific, but the rest of it is skill based. It's, do
mhm,
you know your math skills? Do you know how to use grammar correctly? Can you read and understand? And those are skills you need anyway. And
mhm.
so separate from the test part of it and what happens with those test scores, the skills that we're working on are things that students need and have missed in large part over the last few years.
Yeah. I'm sure that we're going to start seeing the effects of the pandemic over the next decade or so on the kids.
Yes.
I think we saw an immediate effect on adults, and now it's kind of, we're in the next 10 years we're going to see
Mhm. And
where
some of those results are starting to come out. I just saw an article recently that said, I believe the math and reading gains have dropped significantly in the last year or two, and that we are gonna to see continued effects from that for sure.
yeah, I think my son was a little bit hard on himself because he, took an assessment test at the beginning of the school year, and it was
Mhm.
comparing to how he tested at the end of fourth grade. And I think he dropped in either English or math. I don't, or reading or math. I can't remember off the top of my head. But I was like, well, do you believe that you're smart or do you believe that you're not? said, I believe I'm smart. And I said, great. So do you think that you're going to gain that information back, or do you think that it's lost forever? He said, no, I think I'll get it back. I was like, okay, great. So we just know that this is
it's
where you
just
are now.
information. That's it.
Yeah, that's it. And there's so much emphasis, at least in the past, on you got to get a good grade, you got to improve, you got to like that. It's damaging to the self-esteem when we don't have those kinds of conversations. Yeah. Is there, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I had a similar realization a couple of years ago. I was talking to a parent whose child, and this was pre-COVID. I think she was in 7th grade. She had taken a benchmark test. She was at a private school, and most of her scores were 80th, 90th percentile. And the percentiles were comparing just students in private schools. And her math was a little bit lower. It was around 68th or 69th percentile. And the mom was worried about it. And we talked about it. And I said, well, how is she doing in her math class? She was doing fine. She was in honors math. And I said, does she know what she's doing? Is she struggling? No. Can she function with math in her real life? Yes. And the mom was so worried about this score. And when I was thinking about it, I was like, well, she's in the top third of all private school students. And when you compare against all students in the US, she was still pretty high. She was functioning fine in her math class. It wasn't an exam to get her into a school or anything like that. And I just realized I'm not sure there's a reason to be worried so much about this, because the point of school is to learn things so you can function and be an adult. And if she's functioning and doing fine, who cares what this number is? Because all it tells us is, okay, she's in the top third of everybody who's doing this stuff. Fine. And that was a really different shift for me as well, to realize that, okay, it's fine. She can function. And that's, to me, is the point of school, is to be able to function, to do well, and to do the things you want to do in life in the way you want to do them. And she was doing those things. So who cares what this number says?
Right. And I think we lose sight of that. We look at the number and it's not as high as this number, and something must be wrong.
Right. And sometimes there is, and sometimes that is information you get from test scores, is there is something going on and it's worth investigating and it's worth intervening, but sometimes it's not.
Yeah. I was very fascinated by my son's ability to spell because I'm a horrible speller. And I think that, at one point I said to him, okay, we're going to practice your spelling words. And then if you, so we were practicing the spelling words every, Thursday night before the test on Friday. And then one Thursday night we didn't. I said, okay, well, we'll see. If you get 100% on this test too, then we don't need to practice until you get less than 100%. And he's still getting 100% without practicing. And I told him, I don't think I ever got 100% on any spelling test ever. And I have no idea why. And I think because I never practiced spelling words. I never practiced it. We were taught it on Monday and then we tested on Friday. I don't think there was any practice in between.
Yep. And it's just like times tables. The way you learn them is to practice them. And once they're in there, most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time, they'll stick in there. But it is just practice with those things too.
I got labeled as a bad speller. And so I never tried to break out of that label because I was a bad speller. So, and now it's like bad spellers of the world untie. Woo-hoo. That's my favorite shirt ever. So is there a piece of advice that you want to share with moms?
I would say that with these tests, these standardized tests, and this is true for entrance exams and also just the state tests and things, is to put them in perspective about what they mean and what they don't mean, and to help your kid really know, okay, this isn't a measure of your self-worth or your future, and it's not a fortune teller or anything like that. It's just information. And that if your kids are taking tests, especially like SAT or ACT, to put the time into it, because you can see improvement on them, and there are ways to get better at them. And even if you think you're bad at something, it usually isn't true necessarily. And there are ways to work, even if you are genuinely bad at something like art. I have people tell me, oh, you could learn how to draw. And I'm pretty sure I am fundamentally missing something that means I will never be good at art. But most academic stuff, there are ways to at least work around your weaknesses if you genuinely have some, or just to straight up improve. So that would be my advice.
Awesome. And then, is there a book that has been instrumental in your personal development journey?
Yes. So I read, and this one has nothing to do with test prep, but I read a book in my early 20s. It was called The Dance of the Dissident Daughter. And I just knew the author's name. Sue Monk Kidd is the author. And she, at the time she wrote it, she was a strong Christian author. And at the time she started realizing some of her beliefs, her internal beliefs weren't matching up with what she had learned, and what she was a pastor's wife, and she'd been very involved in religion. And she suddenly started realizing her beliefs were somewhat different. And it's all about her exploration of realizing how she wanted to live her life, what she wanted to believe, what she did believe, what she didn't believe. And that book was really important for me because it was the first time I realized, and I did read it around 21 or 22, that I did realize, oh, I don't actually have to just accept the beliefs that were given to me from my family and from society, and that I myself really do get to choose what I want to do and how I want to live my life and what I want to believe. And religion wise, but also just general life too, about what I wanted to do and how I wanted to live. And I read it every few years. I really like it.
That's so cool. What a cool gift that you received and gave to yourself at the same time, like that you can. It took me many years. I was into my 30s before I had that same kind of thought. Like, I get to choose what I believe, not just about religion but also about, I talk a lot about my limiting beliefs. I don't have to believe those.
Yeah, and that when I went to graduate school right after college, I went to school to be a psychology professor and had spent years planning for this and got into school. And the second day of school, I remember sitting in class and I just had this sudden realization. I thought, this is a mistake. I made the wrong decision. This isn't right. And I had no framework for knowing that I could change my mind, that I could back out of it, that I could make a different decision, because I'd always just known that once you decide to do something, you do it till completion. And I stuck it out for 3 years, and it was torture because it was wrong, and it was wrong for me. And I didn't know I could just walk away. And that book helped a lot with that, of starting to realize, oh, I can just choose something else. And I honestly didn't know I could do that.
Yeah. One of the myth busters I'd like to bust is that quitters never win and winners never quit, because the most successful people are master quitters. They know what is not serving them.
Yes. And that's something I talk with my students a lot about too, especially my high school kids, because they're so stressed about finding the most perfect college, and they really think there's only one place that they can be happy. And generally that's not true. You can be happy at a whole lot of schools for a whole lot of different reasons. But even if you do get to a school and it is the wrong thing, all you do is you find a different school and you transfer, and then you go be happy. And nobody's ever told them that either, that you have options, and you do. And so college is a very important decision. I'm not downplaying that, but it also isn't permanent either. You can change your mind, you can move, you can do something different, you can choose to wait a year, you can choose not to go to college. There's all kinds of ways to live life.
Yeah, at the beginning of 2022, I was enrolled in a psychology degree, and I took the first class, which that class determines whether you can go through the psychology program. And the whole time I was feeling like, I don't know, I wasn't feeling very settled about the decision. And so I said, okay, well, if I get an A, then I think that it's the right choice, and we'll move forward. If I get a B, which B is as low as you can get and still be in the program, then we need to rethink some things. And I think I got like an 89%. And I was like, okay, it is what it is. And honestly, hindsight, looking back at the year that I've had, is a really good decision that I made to not do it right now. And I'm not saying I'm not going to do it forever. But it was a really good time to not take that course. So I'll let the universe decide. So where can our listeners find you?
So my website is inhousetestprep.com. It's www.inhouse, INHOUSE, test prep, it's all one word.com. And I have some parent guides on my website for both the SAT and ACT, and then also for the SSAT and ISEE, which are the tests for private schools and boarding schools. And those guides are available free to download. And there's also a link on my website to schedule a free call if anybody's interested in talking further about test prep.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for coming and giving me a visual into my future, because I never took the SATs either. So
Not at all.
It wasn't, I was going to go to a community college. I wasn't interested. I had no idea, what I wanted to do career wise. It had changed multiple times my senior year. Like, I was convinced I was going to be a teacher from birth. And I took a prep course for teaching. I think it might have even had college credits. I got through the first semester and I was like, this is not for me. And I understand now why, what triggered that thought. But I changed. I decided I wanted to be a sign language interpreter, and I did that for a little while. And then, anyway, I won't go through my whole job career.
Yeah, but you eventually ended up at somewhere that was good for you. And same for me. I thought I was going to be a professor, and I'm not, but I love what I do and I love where I ended up. And I never could have predicted this is what I would do as an adult. And I try to pass that along to kids. Whatever you think you're going to do at 16 or 17, it's probably going to be something else.
Yeah. I mean, it would be kind of cool if my son was an astronaut. Or
I did want to be an astronaut when I was 8.
Yeah, we're going to send him to space camp. So, that might solidify it for him. I don't know. But he's really good at building things. So he still talks about being an architect, but you're right. It's like the world is your oyster if you think of it that way. Like you can choose a million different things. So yeah,
it's pretty exciting.
Yeah. Well, again, thank you so much for being here and enlightening me and our listeners about what it is that you do, and I appreciate you being here.
Thanks, I appreciate it too.
Absolutely. So we'll have another episode of Imperfect Momming for you next week, and until then, keep healing. Bye, guys.
Thank you for tuning in to Imperfect Momming. It's time for us to step up and realize that our power is not in trying to shape our children. Our power lies in shaping ourselves into the people we want our children to model themselves after. Don't just do it for your kids. Do it for yourself. When you become a more self-aware, compassionate, and confident person, you and everyone around you benefit. For more information about me and my work, visit AlysiaLyons.com. That's AlysiaLyons.com. See you next time.